Hey everyone, in this video we are going to learn how we can deep copy an object in JavaScript and what exactly is the difference between a shallow copy and a deep copy. So let's understand this with an example. So let's say we have an object obj1 and it has some key value pairs in it. Let's call it name test and age 30. Now what I want to do is copy this object into some other variable. So I'll call it obj2. So obj2 equals to obj1. Now if I console.log both of these objects, so console.log obj1, similarly console.log obj2. So if I run this, you'll see that it looks like that it has been successfully copied, but actually it's not. So what do I mean by that? So right now if I modify something here, so in obj2 let's say I change some value name property in it. So obj2.name equal to Ankit. If I save this and go to the console, you will see that the changes have been done in both of these objects. I made change only in obj2. obj1 has also been modified. So what's the solution here? So the simpler approach is to use the spread operator or Object.assign here. So if I add spread operator while assigning it to a other variable and go back to the console, you'll see that this time only obj2 has been modified. The original copy, the original object obj1 is still same. Similarly, instead of spread operator, I can do, it is the older approach. What I can do is write object.assign, then pass the target object as empty object and source object as obj1. If I save this, go to the console, you'll see it's same. Only obj2 has been modified. But it's not exactly the complete solution, because if in case it is a nested object, so let's say it has one more property in it called address, which is an object, and it contains further key value pairs, let's say street, dummy street. And what I want to do is modify something inside this nested object. So what I'll write, obj2 dot address dot let's say city equals to, let's say, test city. If I save this, as you can see that the changes have been applied to both of the objects obj1 and obj2. Why? Because when we are using object.assign or the spread operator, the copy made is only one level deep, so only up to here. But if in case we have nested objects, that means one object inside the other, then in that particular case those nested objects still behave or still have the same reference. That means inside these nested object, if I modify something in obj2, it will be reflected in obj1 as well. So it's not a complete copy, it's a shallow copy, it's only one level deep. So what's the fix here? So to fix it, there is one hacky way, which is use JSON.parse and JSON.stringify. Pass the object to it. If we save this, you'll see this time that the property city is only added to obj2, not to the obj1. The original copy remains intact. The most optimal way, or the best way, is to use the cloneDeep method provided by the library lodash. So in order to use lodash, we just have to add that cdn here, and after that, instead of writing it like this, what I can do is write obj2 equals to underscore, which stands for the lodash library, and then the function cloneDeep, and pass the object obj1 to it. Now if we save this and check in the console, you'll see that the property city is only added to obj2. The original copy remains same. Let's look at how we can write our own function to create a deep copy in JavaScript. Create our function at the top here. We'll call it deep clone. It will be an arrow function which takes one parameter input, which is the input object which we need to clone. Now let's handle the case for primitive types. So it will be a recursive function which means it will be calling again and again, so that if we encounter an array or an object, we can copy it as well, and it doesn't have the same reference as its original copy. So let's first handle the case for the primitive types. So for that, if input is equal to null, or type of input is not equal to object, then that means we are dealing with a primitive type like string, integer, boolean values. In that case, what we can do, we can just return the input as it is, because these are the primitive types. Now let's handle the case for the reference type, which is our array and our object. So how do we check if it is an array or an object? So for that, what we can do, we can create a variable, let's say initial result. We'll use array.isArray method. We pass the input to it. It will be true if the input contains an array, and false if it is an object. So if it is an array, we'll initialize the initial result with an array, else we'll use an object. Now once we know that whether the input present here is an array or an object, what we need to do is loop through that particular array or particular object and again call the deep clone method recursively. So now we know whether we have an array or an object, we need to loop through that particular array or that object. So how we can handle the scenario for both the array and object? So what we'll do is use the object.keys method. What this function or what this method returns us is, if in case we pass it an array, it returns us the indices of the elements present in that array. So 0, 1, 2. And if in case you pass an object to it, a colon 10, b colon 20, in that particular case, it will return you an array of all the keys present inside that object. So using object.keys, we can access that particular value using input at key. So irrespective if it is an array or an object, using this we'll be able to access that particular value. So we'll write here return object.keys, pass the input variable to it. Then here we'll use the reduce method, and reduce takes two things, a callback function and an initial value. So the callback function will contain accumulator and the current value, which I'll name it as key, and the initial value, which will be our initial result variable, which we declared above. Now inside here, what we need to do is recursively call the deep clone method again and assign the value returned by it to the accumulator at that particular key. So accumulator at that particular key will contain deep clone input at that particular key. Then at the end, we'll just return the accumulator. Don't worry, I'll dry run the whole code to explain you in a better way. Now, instead of using the cloneDeep method provided by lodash, we'll call our deep clone method and pass the obj1 as input to it. So if we save this and run it in the console, you'll see that only obj2 has been modified, obj1 remains the same. Now let me dry run the whole code to explain it to you. So let's dry run this code. So initially when we pass obj1 to this input variable contains this whole object in it. So right now we'll check if input is equal to null or input is not equal to an object. This condition is not true. So we'll continue here. Initial result will check if it is an array or an object. In this case it is an object. So initial result will contain object here. Now we'll loop through all the values present in this object. So object.keys here will return us name, age, and address. Initially, the accumulator is an empty object which we passed it here, the initial value to the accumulator. Next, what we got is input at that particular key. So here initially key will be name. Means in this whole object, the key name contains the value test in it. We pass the value test again to the deep clone method, and now this condition will be true because it is not an object and it is not null. So in this particular case, it will return us the value, and inside the accumulator will store it to that particular key. So here for the key name will store the value test. So this will be a new accumulator now. Next, the next key will come, so which will be age. So here the key will contain age in it. Next, again we'll pass input at key which is 30 to it, to 30 to the deep clone method. Again this condition will be true, and we'll just return 30 from here. So at age, so at key age will have value 30 to it. Next, we'll have the key address here, and again we'll pass the input at that particular key. So in this whole object, at key address, whatever value is present, we'll pass it to the deep clone object. So this time it will be an object, and this condition will not be true. So in this particular case, what will happen is, again initial result will be initialized, and we'll check if it is an array or an object. In this particular case, it is an object, so it will be initialized to an empty object. Let me initialize it down here. Again we have a empty object here, and this time our input is this whole new object, the value present in the address key. Okay, now we'll loop through the keys present in that particular object, which will be an array containing only street in it, and then we'll check input at that particular key. So input at key street will pass it to the deep clone object. Now what will happen, this condition will be true because at here dummy street, here it is not an object, it is a primitive type, so we'll just return it here. So this particular initial result will contain street as dummy street. Now once we are done with this particular recursion call, we'll return the whole object here. So we are returning the whole object here. So this whole object will be returned from here, for which particular key this recursion call was made. It was made for the key address. So for the address key here, we will be storing the object returned from the recursion call, which was this one. And after that, the whole object will be completed, and this will be the final object that we will be returning. Now here it's not exactly the perfect function, of course, like it's not exactly the replacement for the cloneDeep function provided by lodash. There are certainly many edge cases, many scenarios which we have missed. For example, in case of dates, this particular function will not run. So what we can do to handle that, we can write here if input is instance of date. In that particular case, we can just return new date at that particular input. Similarly, there could be many kind of scenarios, many kind of edge cases to more enhance this deep clone function. So this is how we can implement our role function to deep clone an object in JavaScript. And this was it for this video. Thank you for watching.